So can you all see that? And maybe you could tell me through audio.
We can see
Yeah.
it, yes.
Okay. Yeah, in order to share this way, I don't have anyone else on video. So we're at local DAO summer right now, and I'll be talking about this concept of hyperbeings this evening. And towards the end, we'll look at what that has to do with DAOs. So this is a LiDAR image here, upriver from me. My watershed is the Connecticut River watershed, and LiDAR is uses lasers and allows for some amount of penetration into the ground. So you can see the history of the course of the river. This is an image that was created by the cartographer Daniel Coe. He has some really beautiful images, and I feel like one of the first things that when I see this image that I think is wow, the river is a lot more than the water passing through its banks. This starts to connect us into kind of this larger being here that travels through the landscape and maybe is larger and more significant than we might have first thought. So seems like most of you know me, but any of those who don't, I am the son of two aquatic ecologists. On the bottom here, you can see my mom and myself from a trip this spring. This is our last season as a field biologist, and we're just stopping by this Deer Hollow Brook in Vermont. And then the photo up above is Racebrook Lodge, where we've hosted regen retreats over the years, and I'm in the middle there, and then we have Gregory and Christian, some of the other co-founders of Regen Network when we were just getting started. And these days, I'm the president of the board at Regen Foundation, and the foundation is home of this community staking DAO program, which is, I guess you could say, a form of DAO localism, in that we have these DAOs focused on land regeneration all over the world. And then I'm also a lifelong citizen of the Connecticut River watershed. So just to share a little bit about the Connecticut River bioregion, it's the longest river in New England and also the largest watershed in New England. In pre-colonial times, the river was the center of human settlement and commerce, and that's continued to the present day. There's a dam not far from me called the Great Falls Dam, and the Great Falls was this spot on the river that many different indigenous groups would meet for the salmon run. These days, in part because of the dams, there aren't any salmon anymore, and one of the ideas I would just want to put out here is that if we're attending to the regeneration of a region, I feel like rivers are one of the primary centers that we can be working with, and then particularly the largest dams on the rivers are doing some of the most harm. So to get into this concept of hyperbeings a little bit, I've been trying to come up with metaphors for people here, and a metaphor that has really struck me has been the one coming out of Miyazaki's film Spirited Away, which came out in 2001. So you might need to watch the film again to catch this, but some of the primary characters in the film are rivers. So we have Haku, the dragon here, and Chihiro, the little girl, And Haku is the river that passed by the apartment block where Chihiro grew up. And then she moved away in part when the river got kind of covered up by further development. Um, there's a number of different spirits that pass through the film. One of them starts out as this stink spirit, just kind of full of sludge, and comes to the bathhouse. And Chihiro really takes care of this stink spirit, and turns out that the stink spirit is actually this king of the river gods called Kawa no Kami, and this is how the river feels afterwards. And I feel like this is a great analogy for dam removal here. You can see all the kind of sludge and debris that's built up behind the dam, and dam comes out, and then we get this beautiful king of the river gods. So I've been working with this concept of hyperbeings because I feel like one of the challenges in working on the bioregional scale is there needs to be an ontological shift for people to be able to truly be relating to their bioregions, and ontology has to do with our state of being, and David Bollier and Silke Helfrich are two of the kind of preeminent scholars of commons, and they published this book Free, Fair, and Alive in 2019. And they were just going to get right into commoning, and the book actually launches off with this big section on this onto shift, because they felt like without kind of a shift in being state, people can't even begin to relate to, in their instance, commoning, and in my in my instance, with bioregions. So I'm putting forward this concept of the hyperbeing. So I also want to talk about one of my other sources in this thinking, and that is Christopher Alexander's work on wholeness. So Christopher Alexander was an architect. You might know his book, A Pattern Language, which was published in the 70s and has been very influential to the permaculture movement, actually to the computing movement as well. There's a whole kind of branch of developers and engineers that are into Christopher Alexander. But what I wanted to point out here was his series from 2002 to 2004, which is called The Nature of Order. So altogether, it's like, that many pages of material, a few thousand pages. And actually, if you're into it, there is a school in Italy that teaches a year-long course each year, starting in the fall, remotely. So anyone that wants to learn more about that can reach out. But Christopher Alexander was interested in this question of what creates a living building, in his case, or a living community, or a living city. And one of the things that he found was that there's this concept of centers that compose wholeness. And when you have a whole, it's integral or integrated, in the sense that even the most minute disruption can cause unpredictable and catastrophic consequences. So to apply that to rivers, sometimes you might think, well, it's just a dam. How much harm could it cause? And the answer is sometimes a lot. So come back to this hyperbeings concept a little more. I think that there is already, at least in the bioregional movement, an animist perception of Earth. So I used ChatGPT to come up, or DALL-E to come up with these images here. And we have that kind of Gaian global scale integral living planet Earth, kind of the super intelligence that is our planet. And then on the other end of things, we have human community and the local scale. But I feel like something that's missing is something kind of comparable to a Gaia concept, but for the bioregional scale. So forests, mountains, rivers, uh, seas, lakes. So that's where this hyperbeings concept comes into place. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about dams, since dams are one of the biggest disruptors to our river hyperbeings. So there's this great book actually published by Patagonia. I didn't know Patagonia was a publisher, but they've published over 40 books at this point. One of them last year was Stephen Hawley's Cracked: The Future of Dams in a Hot, Chaotic World. And it does a lot to articulate challenges with dams. And just to go through some of the benefits of dam removal here, you get a decrease in methane emissions, a decrease in water temperatures, a decrease in infrastructure maintenance cost. You can have the restoration of indigenous cultural sites, the restoration of indigenous fishing customs, the restoration of nutrient cycling, the restoration of sediment flows. You have a decrease in insurance premiums related to infrastructure failure, an increase in fishery vitality, an increase in water quality, an increase in biodiversity, an increase in ecosystem connectivity, and an increase in carbon sequestration under former reservoir sites. So there's a lot of dams in the United States and elsewhere. In the US, we have about 92,000 large dams. That's in the inventory of the Army Corps of Engineers. And then we have as many as 3 million small dams, dams that are, like, those can be like 3-foot tall dams that have been there since colonial times. And there's an organization that's been working on this issue called American Rivers, and their research has shown that up to 85% of those dams are unnecessary, harmful, and dangerous in their language. So there's there are some dams that maybe they're vital for whether it's a flood control dam or an important reservoir or something else like that. Maybe we leave those for now. That said, that means we can still take out millions of dams that nobody wants there anymore. So over the past century of dam removal, about 0.4% of large dams have been removed, and even smaller proportion of small dams. So that's a very large problem. The approach to dam removal that we've been taking so far has not at all scaled to the magnitude of the challenge. So that's where I'm looking at this concept of monetizing dam removal. I've been working on a concept note. Right now it's under review from some of my colleagues, so I don't have a public draft yet. But the basic idea here is that positive externalities of dams are recognized on the books of dam owners and operators, and the negative externalities rarely are. And one of the things I want to look at here is using green bonds, eco credits, and ecological institutions. How can we change this? So I'm going to go through those 3 instruments here and look at some examples. So with a green bond, it's a fixed income instrument where the purchaser is willing to pay for outcomes. and a service provider is able to achieve regeneration, and then an investor bridges the two, funding the regeneration up front and receiving the profit once the outcomes are achieved. So I map out the three different parties there and kind of the flow through how things work. One case study that could illustrate that for my bioregion is that Old Lyme and Old Saybrook are on the estuary on the Long Island Sound, where the Connecticut River meets the ocean. And because of the dams, there's a massive amount of sediments that have built up behind those dams and slowed the rate of regeneration of coastal wetlands, that the ocean's just eroding things away, and the sediments are not moving down the river to replenish that soil. And Old Saybrook did this coastal resilience and adaptation study, and they found that the average annualized loss due to coastal erosion for the town of Old Saybrook is $16 million. So certainly it doesn't take, that's just Old Saybrook. That's not looking at that's not looking at Old Lyme, and it also isn't factoring in intensification due to climate change or other things like that. That's right now. So it doesn't take long for that to add up to hundreds of millions of dollars. So in the green bond scenario, this beachfront property stabilization green bond, the idea is that the municipalities could create this green bond, and that they could put funds into the removal of upstream dams. The first two major dams are the Holyoke Dam and the Great Falls Dam. Those could be removed. The sediments could be restored. Sediment deposition could be restored to rebuild the coastal wetlands, and those damages could be significantly reduced. And this photo here is, I wasn't able to find a good photo of the Connecticut River estuary, but this is from Martha's Vineyard, a photo that I took in 2009, looking at a tidal wetland up front, and then there's a dune that's kind of this barrier beach protecting the island. So the next instrument I was going to look at here are eco-credits. So eco-credits are one of the things that Regen Network utilizes, and I have an image here of the Regen market and this biocultural jaguar credit project that we have. It's a pre-finance project, so it puts money into a project up front before outcomes have been achieved. So there's two basic kinds of credits: these ex ante, which provide the funds before, and ex post, which provide funds afterwards. And actually, going back to green bonds are one way to bridge those two. But an eco-credit's a methodology to track and denominate a specific facet of ecosystem health. So to apply that in my space, I've been thinking about this short-nosed sturgeon eco-credit. So the short-nosed sturgeon in the Connecticut River, there's one population downstream of the Holyoke Dam and one population upstream of the Holyoke Dam, and you'd say, well, they're fine, they can just live on their own. But what happens with habitat fragmentation is you get these genetic bottlenecks where the population's so small that they start losing fitness and become inbred and lose vitality. And so reconnecting those fragmented populations can make a huge difference. And sturgeon also are, their populations are very limited. I think I saw something like there's 600 reproducing female short-nosed sturgeon in the Connecticut. So they're in need of help. There happen to be caviar companies that sell sturgeon eggs, sturgeon caviar, and that they're not using the Connecticut sturgeon, in part because the population is so severely limited. But the thought here is, well, what if we had a short-nosed sturgeon eco-credit where caviar brands paid into a fund that purchased eco-credits that removed dams to enhance the lives of sturgeon? So then the third instrument I want to look at here are ecological institutions. So my colleague at Regen Foundation, our executive director, Austin Wade Smith, came up with this concept of an ecological institution in concert with Earth Law Center and the public benefit arm of Regen Network. So an ecological institution is a framework that integrates legal, economic, and governance systems to support and enforce the rights and value of non-human entities, such as ecosystems or bioregions. And the picture here is the top of this great paper that Austin has written. Definitely recommend you check it out if you haven't yet. So here I'm looking at this river herring ecological institution. The river herring used to be a species where there'd be millions of herring running every year. That they've been in severe decline due to the dams, and they're a species that many other species, such as striped bass, salmon, other larger fish, are relying upon. So in this example, there's the possibility of anglers in the fishing industry funding a treasury managed on behalf of the river herring. That river herring ecological institution could then bring lawsuits against dam owners. There's the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. It's likely that the major dams on the Connecticut are in violation of those acts. And if their licenses were revoked, they would move into insolvency. And at that point, the river herring ecological institution could purchase the dams, remove them, and remediate, and then the herring populations could rebound. So I wanted to, so those are three examples of instruments that could monetize dam removal and shift some of those dynamics that I'm speaking to here. I wanted to come around to this question of grassroots DAOs. That's I know this series has been using the term local DAO. Regen Foundation has been using grassroots DAO, some certainly very close terms. One of the questions that we've been asking ourselves is what contributions are grassroots DAOs uniquely positioned to contribute? So I have this Venn diagram over here of conventional grassroots organizations and their limitations, and then the magic of DAOs. And I think the question is, in that mandorla formed by in the center there, that's the place that we should be looking to grassroots DAOs. How can DAO tooling augment existing endeavors? And I've just, I guess, given some examples. For example, I mean, an ecological institution could be set up as a DAO. Eco credits can be managed by DAOs. Green bonds could be too. I'm not going to provide any more answers right here, but I guess in this summer of local DAOs that we're all participating in here, I think that's a great question for each of us to be holding, is what are the places that DAOs are uniquely positioned to be additive to existing endeavors. I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel here. I think we can work with existing orgs. So in closing of this presentation, I just wanted to share another great Daniel Coe image, this one here, of the Yellowstone River, this image coming from Montana. and at almost 700 miles in length, the Yellowstone's the longest undammed river in the continental United States. So Connecticut's, depending on how you measure it, maybe 406 miles. Who knows? Maybe we'll be on the list someday of longest undammed rivers. And with that, I will wrap my presentation. Oh, look at all of these others that have joined since then. So at this point, I'd like to open it up to Q&A and discussion. So if you want to get in the chat here, if you want to raise your hand, either one works. Go for it, Benjamin.
Hi, Will. Well, first, just amazing and super inspiring. I'm really glad that I tuned in to hear all of that. I have been thinking a lot about bioregional governance, and I'm really curious if you have any kind of insights or vision around should bioregions themselves have ecological institutions, and how might those kind of stack into watersheds? That's sort of what I've been thinking about, is watershed governance and bioregional governance and how they relate to each other. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I guess I would say definitely. So ecological institutions can definitely operate at multiple scales. You could have hyper-local ecological institutions. You could have bioregional ecological institutions. You could have in the paper, Austin looks at species having institutions. So depending on the species you look at, you could be looking at a global institution. So I think absolutely there's a kind of a nestedness here, and a nestedness of ecological institutions that's then employing tools like DAOs and other entities to further their aims.
I have a question. Thank you, Will. You mentioned the two potential eco-credit examples in your watershed. How would they, like, if they were both funding in part through the removal of dams, how would they collaborate together to do that?
Yeah, so I guess this gets at the kind of the bigger concept I'm looking at in the paper, which is how can we stack these instruments so that you have that's why I go through and list those more than a dozen benefits of dam removal, because if you just have one benefit that you're able to monetize, okay, that's that helps out a little bit, but dams are big and expensive to remove. So I think the idea here is to stack a number of different instruments together, and here I think that DAOs are an interesting entity type to look at, because you certainly could have a treasury that gets deployed once certain criteria or benchmarks are hit. For example, that river herring, the ecological institution could work with the estuary regeneration green bond, and once they both cumulatively raised enough money to remove the two dams, then they could pay out to service providers that are doing that. So definitely the idea here is to stack on as many of these as we can.
Cool.
Any other questions from people here?
actually on that thread, I'm curious, for dams that have been removed, is there like an analogous structure or stacking of structures that was successful in doing that we can like learn from? And I guess maybe more generally, just what can we learn from successful projects that have removed dams?
Yeah. So also in the paper, I do highlight 4 different case studies of existing dam removal projects. So in the instances where dams have been removed, one theme is they've been losing money, that it's uneconomic to continue operating the dam. That might be because the dam's literally falling apart. It also has to do with the regulatory environment. So hydro dams, which are some of the largest dams, but also represent just I think it's like 3.4% of those 92,000 dams. They were all licensed by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And in 1986, Congress passed an act saying that they had to balance the hydro production with all the other issues that dams create, ecological issues, social issues. But how, it sounds like that algorithm is pretty skewed because it took until 1997 for FERC to revoke a single license. They've issued thousands and thousands of licenses, and it took until 1997 for them not to issue one. And that was in Maine, the Edwards Dam, and they said you can install some fish ladders, which don't work great but are better than nothing, for $10 million, and it turned out that it cost 7.2 or something like that to remove the dam, and so they chose to remove the dam. Another theme on dams that have come out is that federally recognized Native American nations have gotten behind the dams, like the dam removal projects. So the Elwha Dam would be one project to look at, and the Lower Elwha tribe contributing there. So certainly working with indigenous partners, I think, is a big a historically successful approach that I think we should absolutely be carrying forward. I would say what has not been happening, it does not seem like anyone's been monetizing dam removal in the ways that I've been speaking about here. So hopefully this could accelerate things. It also seems like there's been very little lobbying of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission on behalf of dam removal. And then there's been pretty limited rights of nature litigation or other kinds of litigation. There's been some amount, but it seems like adding those tools to the toolkit could be helpful.
Sounds like we'll need to read your paper soon.
Yeah, I'll share it as soon as I have a public draft. Anybody else?
Yeah, thanks, Will. I've been thinking a lot about what. Sorry, I'm sort of in public and there's a lot of noise. Thinking a lot about what role DAOs can serve that is like totally distinct from the roles that institutions serve. And I've been looking at like the nature of web protocols. Benjamin and I have been talking a lot about this. Most early DAOs were sort of sprouted up to service and help propagate and sort of secure or otherwise like provide functions for open source web protocols. I think that there could be a corollary in the sort of real world when it comes to DAOs that provide support for protocols of behavior, rather than institutional or legal behavior that would support different types of ecological health. It's almost as if, like, I think what I'm it's still just the beginning of a thought, but I think it's almost like, how could you take a maker sensibility, and where bike repair, for example, is something that is a protocol that people learn rather than something that's affiliated with any specific institution. And you can just sort of openly spread that, you can openly propagate those knowledge sets, and they're very effective, and they have the potential to be tremendously transformative. How could you look at something like protecting watersheds as almost like a maker protocol? What would be the things that on the individual level could be done, and how could DAOs support the sort of open propagation of that in a way that institutions would be sort of unnecessary for? Maybe, yeah, thinking about DAOs, maybe that's one way that they're distinctly suited in a way that would sort of supplement what institutions can and can't do.
Yeah. So Regen Foundation also works in the kind of education and capacity building space, and thinking about how DAOs can support with that. So I don't think that's too much of a jump to be thinking about that here with rivers and watersheds. I guess it's in some ways that's an expansive question that I think there's a kind of a million ways that DAOs could support, and on that kind of skill building side. One of the first things that comes to mind is there's a tradition in various cultures and parts of the world of river keepers or river stewards. So one of the first things that I would think of is like essentially a toolkit for river keepers, creating a multi-local guild DAO for river keepers. But I'm sure we can come up with some other ideas too. Okay, I see there's some comments in the comment thread here too. If anyone wants to call out any in particular. So managing credits through smart contract transactions or on-chain actions be to ratify agreements. I think both of those could occur. Yeah, any other questions or comments?
It looks like there's a question. Is it easier to copy paste and implement a DAO structure or existing entity structures?
Well, so I guess it depends on what aspect of this endeavor you're looking at. Maybe for hyperbeings, which are kind of not necessarily conducive to a traditional institutional format. Maybe DAOs are more conducive. Although Austin has put forward this kind of ecological institutions concept, which you could say queers the kind of human nature boundary, or unduels that boundary, to say maybe you can have these kind of earth native institutions that include humans, watersheds, species, forests, and beyond. So in that instance, maybe you're kind of using all of the above. Yeah.
When we start talking about like places, it's hard because every place is different, and so you can't just assume everything is the same. So it's an interesting question. I like the question that was prompted before that. How to replicate these things, but you need to make it maybe modular or something so it's flexible. But still, yeah. How do we find ways to roll it out more efficiently if it works well?
Yeah, and I guess to come back to Alexander's concept of centers. So one of the things that he builds on centers in this fractal way and says, you want to have strong centers. And what are strong centers? Well, strong centers are composed of a series of centers that work in an integral way to form this larger whole. So I guess to use that terminology to say, well, maybe there's this toolkit that you're drawing from. You're drawing from the kind of Riverkeeper DAO, this eco credit model, the ecological institution model, and you're sourcing all of those from the essence of your place. And of course, they're going to look different here in the Connecticut River Basin, in the Columbia Basin, but they'll be drawing from this pattern language.
That's a good example.
Well, if whenever we're at the end of our questions here, that's we're fine to wrap up. So I guess we officially have 10 more minutes if anyone else wants to get their voice in here, and also we can wrap as soon as people are good. All right. Well, maybe that's a good spot.
Thank you so very much. I think we will all be watching this a couple times over. And hopefully we can all take conversation into the Telegram. I pinned the event and the Telegram link is in there also.
All right.
Thank you.
Everyone.